Hello, everyone, and welcome to another panel from Air Dialogue. Um, I would just like to ask all of our guests and on our YouTube channel to please like and subscribe to the video. It really helps when spreading the word. So I would just like to start with a short introduction of our organization. Air Dialogue was established in Dublin in 2010 as a sister charity of Dialogue Society to advance social cohesion by connecting communities, empowering people to engage, and contributing to the development of ideas on dialogue and community building. Air Dialogue aims to facilitate dialogue on a whole range of social issues, regardless of any particular faith or religion. It stands for democracy, human rights, and the non-instrumentation of religion in politics, equality, and freedom of speech. Now on to the topic of our panel today. The issue of climate change is not a new topic. We are already observing longer summers, rapidly shrinking glaciers, severe weather patterns, and trees and plants flowering off season. With global temperatures continuing to rise, we can expect drastic temperature changes, rising sea levels, and thus flooding, more droughts, heat waves, and stronger and more intense hurricanes. All of these will bring water scarcity, increased flooding, extreme heat, and more lethal diseases. Conflict and human migration are also likely to exacerbate. When focusing on Ireland, we can see an overwhelming consensus on the threat of climate change and the desire for a nationwide action plan. According to the Climate Change in the Irish Mind report conducted by the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, and Yale's University Programme on Climate Change and Communications, a staggering 96% of the Irish public believes that climate change is happening right now, but 91% say that the issue is of personal importance to them. 90% are arguing that it is a national responsibility to act in accordance with climate change. The majority of people believing that Ireland should step up and play its part, with citizens believing that businesses and governments should be doing much more on minimising the effects of climate change and bringing greenhouse gas emissions down, hopefully achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. This panel will focus on the development of productive dialogue between professors, researchers, civil servants, and climate activists, and people working in sustainable development. As an organization with a strong focus on two-way communication, we want to ensure that professionals and lay people know the facts, exchange old ideas, generate new insights, and what could be done. We'll be hopefully looking to focus on really the main effects of climate change on Ireland and the world, the role that the Irish government has in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, how business in Ireland should and can steer towards a greener future, and is it worthwhile for individuals and the average person to do the little things to conserve the environment? Firstly, I would like to introduce and give a warm welcome to our speakers today. Our first speaker, it will be Marion Briggs. She is the Sustainability Manager at the Health Beacon and the Chair of the Board of Friends of Earth, Ireland. The stage is yours, Marion.
Thanks, Ronan. Thank you very much. And I really want to say thank you so much to Air Dialogue for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. So as Ronan said, I am the Sustainability Manager for a health technology company called Health Beacon. I'm also chair of the board of directors of Friends of the Earth. I am the secretary of a supply chain alliance called the Alliance to Zero, and I'm also the leader of their end-of-life working group. So I'm quite broad and busy. But for tonight's conversation, I'm going to talk to you with my sustainability manager hat on from the corporate perspective. So just to give you a really quick background, I've been at Health Beacon for the last 2 years. I was brought in to help them launch their Green Labs waste solution, and I'll talk to you a bit about that in a moment. But now I oversee their internal and their external sustainability for the company more broadly. So how we align the company with their sustainability targets. I oversee a lot of regulatory items around sustainability. I act as a liaison to various stakeholders, and I oversee the continued build out of our Green Labs program. So just a quick introduction to the company. We are a health technology company whose mission is to build smart tools for managing medications. So we do this for medications that are taken through injection. And specifically, we focus on patients who take their medication in a home setting rather than at the doctor's office. So like 30 million people in the US and EU are dependent on injectable medications. And a lot of people have to go on these types of medications to deal with very serious, often chronic conditions. And unfortunately, up to half of them fail to keep up with their medication schedules. And in addition, they don't have a way to dispose of their used injections in a safe and sustainable manner. So that creates an enormous problem and a huge waste stream. So our uniqueness in our company is that we have a role to play in the healthcare of our patients. So what happens, that role is that we're able to take their waste and turn it into a connected device that helps them stay on their prescriptions, get some of their health back, and at the same time give them a practical and more sustainable way to deal with their waste. So I'll just quickly show you this device and then we'll move on. This is a health beacon device. It goes in somebody's home. It reminds them when they need to take their medication, and then they give themselves their injection. They put it in this device, takes a photograph, a timestamp, and then the injection itself is taken into the device. So my job as a sustainability manager is to deal with everything that happens after they've taken their medication. So I just want to back out for a minute to the broader context. So as an SME, we're not a huge company. We're growing really, really quickly, but we're by no means obligated to have a sustainability agenda. We're still in this period of rapid growth. There isn't the same external expectation for reporting and sustainability initiatives that like a large multinational company might have. But, as I'm sure you're well aware, we're all currently going in the wrong direction. Anyone that's read the news recently can understand that really the climate crisis is huge and the scale of it is huge. So for my job, I try and ground myself in the broader context. So for instance, just looking at the news today, there's these massive heat waves in India and Europe. There's parts of northern India where the temperature has soared to 49 degrees Celsius. In March, temperatures at the poles were 30 and 40 degrees Celsius above normal. 30 and 40 degrees, it's just bananas. The World Weather Attribution Group of international scientists consulted historical weather records and suggested that early long heat waves that impact vast geographical areas, which used to be rare, are now 30 times more likely because of greenhouse gases released by human activities. So there's higher levels of carbon than ever in the atmosphere. Deforestation is continuing, biodiversity continues to decline. And a lot of industries in Ireland have emissions that continue to rise. So in the global north, in the more wealthy countries, we are responsible for 50% of global emissions. And those that are least responsible are paying the highest price and sometimes paying the ultimate price. So for me, I feel it is incumbent upon all of us as individuals, as large corporations, governments, SMEs, everybody to do everything in our power to stop and reverse this trend. So having said all that, I'm going to go back to Health Beacon for a moment and kind of look at what role we can play as a company and how we can interact. So Health Beacon was already established with a lease program as its foundation. So this device here would go out to a patient on lease. When they were done with their medication or when they were done using it for any reason, it comes back into the company, and then we would refurbish this and send it back out again, trying to keep these in the world as long as possible. So we really, as a company, we were established without that kind of take, make, waste idea, but seeing if we couldn't keep this as circular as possible. In addition, we were thinking, well, now what can we do with the waste that's inside it? So there's a bin inside that collects all the waste. Once that's 85% full, because we're a data company, we know when it's full. So we're made aware, we can go and collect that waste and bring it back to our green labs. Now we have one of these in Dublin. I'm very, very proud of just opening it about a month ago. We finally got our EPA license, and we have now the first ever reusable circular sharps container, that's what it's called on the inside, that we can use in Ireland. So that's totally fantastic. And what we do is we take it back to our lab, we de-lid it, we tip out the injection waste, we sterilize it, and then we send it back out into the world again, back into production. Then lastly, the bigger issue is, what do we do with this injection waste? So historically, that waste is either incinerated or sterilized and then thrown in a landfill. So it's still not going away. And so what we're doing as a company is where I think companies can really have an impact. We're reaching out to other companies. We're looking at our supply chain. We're trying to figure out what can we do with this that's more sustainable and really can have a difference. So last year we founded with 7 other members, we founded a supply chain alliance called the Alliance to Zero that looks exactly at what can we do with this injection device? How can we make this a more sustainable solution? So I really believe that business has a huge role to play in steering Ireland towards a greener future, but it can't do it alone. And sometimes it isn't even aware that it can play a larger role. I think the good news is that investor and employee activism is on the rise, and this really greatly enables companies to move faster and better. In addition, regulation is really starting to ramp up and squeeze those companies that aren't moving voluntarily. Reporting is starting to become mandatory rather than voluntary. And this is like reporting of your climate targets, reporting on your actual action as a company. And there's standardization starting to happen of reporting. So, and the last thing is the kind of the beginnings of the level of finance that we're going to need to really help green innovation and alternatives is finally starting to get there. And I think that because the corporate community is so connected, we're so data driven and often understanding of and supportive of science, I would argue that all companies, large and small, need to align with science-based targets for decarbonizing their companies, really getting there by 2030. And in addition, using all of that know-how that we have at the company level to work for change, to use that talent and start to solve the environmental problems of today, not just emissions, but really come from a sustainability mindset, having that at the center of everything that we do instead of as add-ons. And I think that's going to be vital to making this transition. And then the last thing I want to say is, one of Rona's questions was, is it hopeless for individuals to do little things to conserve the environment? And I just wanted to briefly address that. I would argue that every action anyone can take is meaningful. And you can start wherever you are. You can start as an individual. You can start in your home. You can start with a friend and say, hey, let's go pick up trash. You can start at work. There's many, many excellent groups that are pushing for change. And this is going to take all of us. So, I don't believe that it will mean huge sacrifice. And I disagree with the media's constant pitting of us against each other. But the reality is that it's complicated, and then it will take everybody doing something in order to tackle this huge crisis and this huge task that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very, very much, Marion. And you're dead right. Well, it's so important I felt that the topic that you were touching on, that companies look for more sustainable ways of dealing with their own waste, that a lot of people maybe want to write off that aspect and go, look, we're clean in the face of things, but when we deal with our waste, it could be a different problem. And especially a smaller company like Health Beacon taking on that responsibility is very, very important. And yeah, well, thank you very, very much for your piece. Second, I'd like to introduce then our next speaker for today is Sarah Elsett. Sarah is a senior political advisor and public policy strategist. Sarah, welcome.
Hi there, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and it's nice to meet you, Marion. So yeah, I'm currently in the US, in Wisconsin. I was working up until recently, I was working in opposition and then in government for a high-profile political leader, working on focusing on the kind of advancing our green and sustainable objectives and making sure that Ireland was no longer a laggard in the fight against climate change and the implications. So I was working behind the scenes there, and it gave me greater insight to understanding the role of, not just public elected representatives, but also people in the policy making sphere. And I think there is a huge underestimation, kind of like we underestimate the level of, stakeholder or, the importance of regular people in this. We kind of look at, that perhaps the politicians or particular green focused parties focusing on such initiatives or policies, that they've got the answers, when actually, it involves everyone. It involves everyone in the community and people. And I think that, for me, on a personal level, I learned a lot more about that and the importance of that in how we move forward and in making sure that we have a just transition. So for me, when I was invited on and I was speaking to your colleague, and we were discussing kind of like, the kind of threats around climate change. And it got me thinking, I could bluntly say that, you know, a complete ecosystem collapse. But what does that really mean? And again, when we're communicating climate change, when we're communicating sustainability, we have to remember that, you know, to kind of get rid of these policy wonk, you know, language, and just, you know, meet people where they're at. So unfortunately, we live in a society where we need to fully understand the direct effect or the consequences on the individual, so on myself or on my family, my close friends, and so on. So I like to kind of put it at, we kind of like, you know, we have to look at it and try to understand it within a larger context of systems. And, you know, you kind of constantly hear when there's protests or even from politicians, they talk about systems change, and it's becoming these buzzwords, and you're kind of thinking, what does that really mean? And, you know, when you discuss that with regular people on the ground, you know, who are part of that system, you kind of explain it as, think of it like a spider's web. It's so delicately connected, and it's independent yet dependent on its arrangement and structure. And that is the system we live in, and we live independently yet very much dependent on its interconnected and structure. So, like, you know, during my time in the Irish Parliament, the Oireachtas, you know, you kind of talk about, like I said at the start, the fight against climate change, or the main threats of climate change. And we kind of speak about it in these kind of, you know, big terms, or, you know, talk about ocean acidification and, you know, eco collapse, you know, ecosystem collapse, and so on. But let's talk about it on a human level. So for me, it's about, you know, again, meeting people where it's at, and it's discussing like what are the threats of climate change and what does it look like? And on a human level, if we look at our economy, it will be further disruptions. It will cost more to manage the consequences of climate change than putting in place the mitigation and adaptation measures that is necessary to ensure that our communities will be resilient to the challenges ahead. So for the regular person, what does that mean again? And it basically means we may see the trickle down kind of costs from, you know, the impact, where we will see increased insurance costs, for example, because I'm here in the US, due to, let's say, living near floodplains, or we're in the path of, you know, forest fires. We'll start to see the increase of food costs, in which we are seeing that now. And, you know, there's a lot of talk being, you know, that's being an effect of just the war at the moment in Eastern Europe and Ukraine and so on. But it's kind of more complex than that. And it's due to supply chain, and, you know, in terms of even looking at water conservation and the efforts that will hit farmers, and how that will have a trickle down effect onto, you know, regular folks who are just going to go and buy the food in their grocery store. So it's understanding it on a human level, again, understanding it in terms of our health, again, as Marion was kind of discussing there, in terms of, you know, the air that we breathe, the water quality, our food sources, and then again to our housing, our property, floodplains, storms. You know, we'll start to see how the poor infrastructure of our housing design and so on will be exposed when there's increased heat waves or in severe weather. So it's basically a complete change in our, you know, lifestyle and our way of life. It disrupts that. So I guess from my background, it just has opened up a better understanding of how to communicate that to people, but also the role of people in this is really, really significant and should not be left to, you know, the Department of Climate Change or to politicians or ministers, that actually people have a significant role in this.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. What I've noticed that both of you have touched on absolutely is bringing things down to the human level, and that day in, day out. I'm working as well at the moment, on a separate job. I won't go into the details, but it did strike me how a lot of people would be strong believers and in climate change and believe that something needs to be done, but everyone's giving out that now they can't drive into work anymore because the carbon taxes. And I was kind of, you know, you're looking at and thinking, this is part of it, you know what I mean? Like that we're building cycling infrastructure. There is that option there for you. Like, you know, these people don't live within cycling distance. And so I think absolutely that bringing things down to the human level and not hoping that someone's going to fix it all for us someday, that we can carry on just as is, that everyone needs to make a conscious effort to take steps towards dealing with this issue. So I'd just like to move on to the next stage. I'm afraid that I regret to inform you actually to both our audience and our speakers that Diarmuid Tony, who was our third speaker, is unable to join us this evening. He very at short notice was unwell, so he wouldn't be able to join us today. So I would just like to speak to both of our speakers there and ask if they would like to either take the opportunity to comment on what one another are doing at the moment in the climate change approach. You're both from different sectors, from different areas, but both thinking in the same sense of bringing things down to the human level. I just wonder if either of you have any comments on each other's presentations.
Yeah, Sarah, you want to go ahead, or will I jump in?
No, I wanted to say, like, in terms of, you know, like the role of, like what I got from it, the role of business and the role of industries, and, you know, and how we can steer this towards like a greener future and so on. And, you know, listening to you there, Marion, it was just fantastic because it's about innovation, it's about development. And like, I think recently, recently there was, you know, quoted, the IBEX CEO was quoted to have said that at the UCD's climate summit that scientists need to be more sensitive to the needs of society and businesses. And, you know, again, when you think about IBEC, you know, IBEC is the largest lobby and business representative group. And, you know, their aim and their objective is to build a better and sustainable future by influencing and delivering for business success. And for me, that's not delivering on business for success, because it's the lack of the kind of forward thinking, and again, that systems thinking as well, in terms of innovation, versatility, development, you know, disrupting the status quo and saying that we can push this envelope and go further, you know. So it kind of highlighted like what you were saying in terms of businesses need to be looking ahead and looking at the bigger picture, looking at the risks, but also the opportunities. And by doing so, understanding the stakeholder risks and opportunities. And kind of, you know, you mentioned something there about the product itself, and it kind of brought to me in terms of, you know, bearing in mind that that also goes beyond the operations of a business, and it goes into their upstream activities from which materials and supplies are sourced, and their downstream activities in which the products are consumed and used. So, you know, businesses can no longer ignore their responsibility for their in terms of for their suppliers or their end users, but at the same time, you know, there's greater scope there for just innovation and research and development and working with scientists and saying, hey, what do we need to do? You know, how can we work together? It, you know, so it's, you know, and I just listening to you kind of, I said, okay, the people on, you know, in the business world are thinking that way. And I guess, you know, the CEO of IBEC is a little bit behind.
Yeah, for sure. It's so funny that you mentioned that comment, because I literally was sitting at a cafe this afternoon talking with two other people in the sustainability world, very high profile, and we were talking about that exact comment. And like the fact that we all wanted, when he said it, we all wanted to bang our heads on our desks. We're like, come on. And I think it's a very good point. And I think that, you know, it's, for me, when I look at the government, I feel like, come on, guys, you got to be brave. You know, you've got to go ahead and pull the trigger and say, we have to have a carbon tax. We have to do these things. And yes, it's going to hurt momentarily, but everyone gets a haircut and then we're much better on the other side. And I think that people get so into their little corners, and I'm not going to give up my bit of carbon emissions, or I really don't want to do this. I want someone else to solve that. And the reality is, it's not going to work that way. And in terms of government, like if you look back at some of the things that the Irish government has done in the past, that there was real anger and frustration at, the one that jumps to mind is the smoking ban, right? I mean, everybody here was like, oh, the publicans are like, nah, it's never going to work, and our pubs are going to close. It'll be a disaster. And the government said, too bad, we're putting this in place. We know it's the right thing to do. Okay, And what happened on the other end? Everybody grumbled and then everybody adapted. That is exactly what needs to happen. The government needs to say—
It's the same thing with the plastic bag levy.
Exactly, with the plastic bag levy, exactly the same thing happened. And I think that it's really important for me. I'd be really interested in understanding from your perspective, Sarah, how we can encourage government to do that. So what the people I was talking to today, one of the things we were talking about was business groups, like, let's say, Doctors for the Irish Environment. That's a perfect example. Here's a bunch of professionals who can come together and basically lobby the government and be activists and say, look, it's not just the far left environmentalists who, you know, can get a bad rap and be put as the enemy at sometimes. You know, this is actually business that's coming to you and saying, we believe this has to happen. We cannot live on a planet that, and we can't do business on a planet with an unstable climate. So it's essential that we all take the deep breath and the haircut, and then we move forward. And how, and Sarah, in your opinion, how do we further encourage government to do that?
I think there's two aspects to it. There's the political parties aspect, you know. I think, you know, this kind of I think climate policy and sustainability and just thinking that way cannot be owned by one particular political party. It needs to be seen in every political party because it impacts the future of the nation. And that's what's important. So, you know, public representatives need to be thinking ahead. They need to be innovative themselves. Political parties need to be innovative themselves. You know, their policies, you know, there's some of the, if you look at some of the political parties and their kind of their grassroots policies, it's fantastic, you know, and I'm talking about across the spectrum from, you know, not just the Green Party, from Labour to Social Democrats to even elements of Fine Gael. You know, there are elements of policies, and I was, you know, I have to, they're not, yeah, exactly. There are elements that are, you know, that are in their policies that see they have a vision, they understand certain elements of business and how business works, but business not as business as usual. Business also needs to evolve, and it's about working together. So I think in terms of the way political parties think, they're constantly thinking their constituents, they're thinking of voters, they're thinking of their voter base. And that's why I see that people have a significant role in this. If you see in 2019, the local elections, and how, you know, people were demanding, you know, climate action. People were demanding climate action because their kids were demanding climate action, or their grandkids were demanding climate action. And that, you know, that led to a green wave, a climate wave. And that's really important. So again, voters, people, they have a role in this. Now, when it comes to government and government departments, for so long, policy was siloed. Everything was seen as environmental, climate was seen in just to kind of within that department. Now that we have a climate act, it's paved the way for a climate action plan that would steer the ship towards a trajectory that aims to halve Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. With that objective, you know, reaching net zero by 2050, the importance of that means that all government departments have to set their own, you know, they have to think of in terms of carbon budgets. They have to think of how, you know, they're going to meet their objectives in terms of, you know, their own climate strategy, you know, thinking in a not so siloed way anymore. It's again, that systems thinking. So I think there needs to be a rejuvenation of how the public policy professionals within government, within the departments, the civil servants, how they think. And I do think that is possible now. We saw what happened with COVID and the pandemic, and how things we thought weren't possible before all of a sudden were possible. So I think with this, those lessons, and we can move forward and work on that, you know, that way. So again, it's having that climate strategy and not being siloed into one department, and not just meeting box ticking exercises. And, you know, and that's where innovation grows. And I'm excited for the future if, you know, everyone jumps on board and wants to steer the ship towards that direct trajectory of a net, you know, a net zero by 2050 kind of thing. So I think it's important. I think the Irish government were set back when they went into government in 2020. The state of affairs of the nation was really bad when it came to climate, when it came to sustainability. We were 10 years behind. I'm in the US. Like I said, I'm in Wisconsin, I'm in Madison, and I'm seeing their cycling infrastructure. And I'm seeing only that happening now in Dublin. And I'm kind of thinking to myself going, whoa, were we behind? You know, if cities in America are kind of ahead of us in terms of our cycling infrastructure, and even, you know, they're working on their pedestrian car centric lifestyle here, but, you know, they're working on it. So it was pretty interesting. But I think we need to also understand that it is being woven into each department. The government is doing a good job in terms of creating resilient communities by developing a sustainable, inclusive and empowered community strategy. So you see that in the Department for Communities. They're looking at, so that's that element of climate action and climate justice. They're going into developing, looking at marine protected areas. They're developing a circular economy strategy. They're looking at how we design our cities and revitalizing our towns across Ireland. They're setting, you know, the carbon budget program for government, which limits our carbon emissions. They're looking at our transport infrastructure. They're developing active travel. So they're making it accessible in terms of costs and design and space for all. So again, it's realizing that each department has a role and they're working on that. And that I believe that the program for government is ambitious on that, and that is the most ambitious we've ever been in decades for our country. So going forward, I think it's up to people holding government account. It's about people making sure that if they follow a particular, you know, political party due to ideological reasons, then, and they care about the planet and they care about their country and they care about their children's livelihood and their future, that then they ensure that that particular political party also has a climate strategy and has a climate policy. So I think, again, my fear is we wait for only political parties with that agenda to be in power to do the work. I think
that'll be too late.
Exactly. We can't afford that. So it needs to be across all political parties. And then in terms of government departments, I think the Climate Act being in place really has set the trajectory well for us. And now it's just about catching up, really, because we're so behind.
Absolutely. Well, that actually goes on well, because as you were saying that people do need to take account, and people in Ireland, as we've read in the statistics, generally do care about the climate, and they want to see, maybe they need to show more emphasis in that regard. But like already we've got comments and we've got some questions for both of you who have come in. So I've got a question for yourself here, Sarah, that you've touched on it briefly before, that we need to catch up, but how does Ireland fare in relation to, say, other developed, specifically developed countries, I think, in terms of how we are coming to fighting climate change? Because countries from all different scales are struggling in very different ways to deal with their issues. But Ireland should be looking at, say, other EU member states, or like North America, as you've touched on. Like, how are we faring in comparison to most of them?
I think the fact that we have a Climate Act, you know what I mean, it's really significant. It's a major win for us. You know what I mean? If we didn't have that, like I said, when we first came in 2020 and saw the state of affairs, we were 10 years behind because there was no one acting on climate for 10 years. So that's why we're catching up. So in terms of, I think, yes, I did the comparison by looking at in the US and looking at Wisconsin and Madison and saying, oh, like Ireland. That isn't very helpful, but in terms of, I think it gives us insight to, sometimes we look at America and say, oh, you know, America's way behind, and, you know, and again, it's case by case and looking at states and how they function and so on, that's given me that insight. So I think for Ireland, we need to set with the trajectory that we're in and work towards it and work together and hold government account. And I think the Climate Act is the most significant thing that we have done in the past 2 years in terms of setting our trajectory forward. Otherwise, I would despair completely.
Okay, thank you very much. And then a question for Marion. How can Irish companies, in their own sense, become greener companies? What steps do you believe that Irish companies can take?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the first thing that Irish companies can do is, well, it's really important to have somebody that knows something about sustainability in the company. And I think that Health Beacon was really lucky because I kind of came on, I actually banged on their door and said, give me a job quite early on. And I was a bit belligerent about it. So Jim, the CEO, hired me after I pestered him a whole bunch. But I think that companies need to have a sustainability person on board, but then they need to let that sustainability person do their job. They need to let them do a full assessment of the company and help the company to sign up to science-based targets. And if they feel like the CEO isn't on board or the executives aren't on board, they need to just keep trying. And I think now is the moment to be really brave. Now is the moment to ask for more out of the companies and to say, look, we are at this pivotal moment and we can have a huge impact. Don't be afraid to show them the graphs, show them the slides, and then show them solutions as well. You know, and I think signing up to science-based targets, putting it in the broader context is really important for companies. That's the first thing I would say.
Okay, thank you. Another question for yourself, Marion, is what should like a metric maybe of companies' key sustainability measures, like what should they look to first?
Sure. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my laptop before it croaks here. Sorry if I'm going sideways. Okay. Great. Now you have me for the remainder of the time. So I think the question was, what are the metrics that companies should look at?
Yeah, like what
I think that companies need to be holistic.
Is she gone? Hello, Marion? Okay, I think we've lost Marion. Maybe her computer did die. Yeah. Hello, Marion.
Oh, okay. Are we back? Are we back?
Oh yeah, you're back.
Okay, you guys
no problem at all. Yeah.
Okay, you're frozen. Sorry, just to answer your question about what metric is important. So I think there's quite a few reporting mechanisms out there that companies can sign up to. So one of them is CDP. One of them, which was originally the Carbon Disclosure Project. There's a whole lot of reporting programs that companies can sign up to measure their carbon emissions, their water, their waste, that, you know, really do an audit of the full company. And then they can set targets based on the best science. So that would be it's called the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI. And they can align with SBTI, which really shows a path for how much you have to decarbonize to be in line with the science as a company. So as has been mentioned, that would be 50% decarbonization by 2030 and full decarbonization by 2050. So, you know, that's challenging for companies that are in cement manufacturing or steel, or, you know, or obviously oil and gas companies, you know, but the reality is that if we are to stay in line with Paris, companies have to do this. They have to get a baseline for what they are currently emitting, and then they have to move towards reducing those emissions. And one last thing I want to say about measurement, you know, I feel like it's really important also for companies to take a step back and look at the whole picture, right? To look at not just the carbon, but the environmental footprint of their waste, their water. We can kind of get focused on just emissions alone. And I think that that's not enough. And I also think that we have to start to look at the social side of things, like how is what we're doing impacting people on a social level? What are the companies that we're working with? You know, taking a much broader picture from a corporate perspective. I hope that helps.
Okay, so then a question for yourself now, Sarah, is what can I as an individual and as a business do to push my government? Like, how can I help the government move in the right direction? What if I'm sitting here right now, what can I do immediately to push my government?
Engage with them. I think it's really important to engage, you know, beyond the Twitter. I think a lot of people go onto social media, they go onto Twitter, they react, you know, they react to clickbait articles, they don't engage with their local representatives. And I'm talking, and not just national level, engage with those on a local level as well. They're your allies, you know what I mean? They're, you know, those on a local level have a significant role. They understand the local communities really well. And by engaging with them, forming relationships with them, letting them know what's important to you in terms of, you know, your concerns. And that kind of, but it's also a two-way street, and it's something that I would criticize government in terms of not having a kind of like a stakeholder engagement strategy, you know, in place, where beyond the public consultation periods where people just submit pieces of, you know, work and they submit it at a certain date and then it gets lost on a website or whatever, you know, but beyond that, engaging with them on the ground. I don't know whether that's roundtable discussions, kind of taking, you know, and not just doing citizens assembly on biodiversity and then that's it, box ticked. You know, it's taken that kind of model, that type of engagement, and taking it onto the ground and working with people on the ground, businesses, local communities, and so on. So I would say to the person that's asking about themselves individually, it's, you know, it's a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing. We're going to see a lot of disruptions, and it's going to affect businesses, and it's going to be very, very challenging. So that is going to mean, you know, a long-term engagement with your local representatives, at local and national level, and holding them to account, and not being just reactive, but also being proactive and working with them on proactive policies. You know, telling them, like, actually, you could do it this way. They need innovative minds from all across the communities, not just the business sector, but from the science and, you know, from the grassroots level, from different leaders throughout the communities and people in the community.
Yeah,
I hope that sums it up.
I couldn't agree more. Oh, and finally, one more question, sorry, for Marion has just come in. This person is just wondering what environmental organizations offer partnerships for businesses. I would assume it's small businesses more so than larger ones.
Yeah, so are you talking about, like, so it's escaping my mind right now. There is a fantastic, I want to say it's a government organization that helps with funding small, like they have a green loan program. Help me out, Sarah. Let's see, who is it? Sorry. If you come back to me in 5 minutes, I will look it up and I will tell you again. But there's Business in the Community is a good organization there, but there's also, I'm really sorry, it's completely blanking my mind. And I'll look it up really quick and I'll get back to you.
We can maybe put it in the description of the video once it's released formally.
Yeah, I apologize. It's not on the tip of
to their website.
I apologize. It's not on the tip of my mind.
Okay. Sorry, I've lost. Can you hear me? Sorry, my connection has just gone a little bit. Okay, perfect. Sorry. Grant, so perfect. I just would like to offer just the opportunity, sorry, to the speakers for one more time. Just, we're coming to the close and the end of our panel. So I would like to thank you very much both for your input and for your attendance here today. I'd also like to apologize to the viewers about Dermot's unable to join us. And just please, everyone, if they could remember to like and subscribe the video. And just to the speakers, if you would have one last line or input or one last piece that we would really like to, just in a brief sentence, to leave our viewers and everyone watching here today.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I would say be open to being surprised. You know, I loved Sarah's reaction when she was like, oh, it's great to hear somebody in the corporate world, you know, A, have the understanding, and B, you know, want to be so engaged. I found the same with finance folks. You know, like there are a lot of people in finance that really understand what's happening and they are really into it. So, you know, be open to being surprised about what a person in government or a person in finance or in corporates might feel or think, and be willing to talk to them and ask them hard questions. But, you know, be open. That's what I would suggest.
And I would add to that and say, don't underestimate yourself. You know what I mean? I know there's a lot of people out there saying, well, what can I do? What can I do? You know, sit down, look at your own skill set, map it out, you know, do a mind map and say, okay, what can I offer? What can I do to change? You know, rather than thinking on the kind of grand scale of things, but kind of on the minute kind of end of things and saying, well, what can I do to influence how I run my business or how I work in the community? What can I do with my family, with my friends? It does have an effect, and it creates, you know, a kind of dominoes, you know, effect of positivity and proactiveness in the community. And that's what's needed. So don't underestimate yourself and hold public representatives to account, please.
Yeah, well, like you, I think the general thing is what you've both said is that everyone has something that they can offer, and in whatever way it is, if it's through your business, through the way you get to work, through in many different aspects of life, you can offer something that can make a difference. And sorry, Marion, I didn't mean to cut you off. Had you one more thing to say, or?
No, I'm good.
Okay, perfect.
Except for saying thank you.
Okay. Okay. Well, no, thank you both very, very much for joining me today. I'll have to call an end to the panel there today, but thanks again, and to everyone who's out there watching, if they could please like and subscribe to the video, because you have no idea, it really, really promotes the videos and it really helps us, absolutely. So thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, Marion, and I hope you have a good evening, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.